Most recent Minecraft prisons have been trying to minimize the amount of security measures they have while still being secure. They try making their prisons cheaper by reducing their size or removing unnecessary blocks that make it take longer to build. Yet, all of them still take multiple hours to build and also create their own security problems by removing too many security measures. So what is the minimum? How many systems can you remove? How many critical prison components are really necessary? What escapes can you patch and what can you ignore? How cheap can a prison get? I present to you the Fox Den. The Fox Den is Minecraft's cheapest and most minimalistic prison, and yet it patches more escapes than any other prison out there. It keeps only what is absolutely necessary and removes everything else. Everything in this prison has been minimalized to the extreme. Almost every prison uses a nether portal to transport the prisoner inside, which leads to some vulnerabilities as there has to be a check for invisible players, either with an extra area ban or with a guard mindlessly staring at a line in the F3 menu. As you can probably guess, this prison doesn't like having things that are unnecessary. In fact, the entire concept of having a nether portal inside the prison is unnecessary. That is why in this prison, the imprisonment process works a little different. Instead of risking an unwanted player ending up inside the prison, the prisoner is transported to the inside of the prison using null state teleportation. Most of you probably know what null state is by now, but for those of you who don't, I'll give you a quick summary. By exiting full screen mode and right-clicking on the white bar at the top of the Minecraft application, your client goes into null state. While in this state, your client does not process your movement and therefore does not send it to the server. Well, that's cool and all, but how do I use it to teleport players inside of the prison? Let me give a quick demonstration using players A, B, and C. Players A and B are guards and player C is the prisoner. Player A gets into the boat, followed by player B. Player B then activates null state, freezing their location inside of the prison. Player A brings the boat outside of the prison and exits the boat, allowing player B to become the driver. Player C then gets into the boat and player B deactivates null state, teleporting them back inside where the boat originally was. The key part, though, is that player C is still in the boat when the boat gets teleported, bringing them inside the prison. Now that the prisoner is inside, they click the respawn anchor and get killed to spawn inside the cell, which uses a skulk sensor to detect the prisoner trying to mine out. The guard refills the respawn anchor and blocks it off, and now the guard is no longer needed inside the prison. Just like the imprisonment process, almost every prison uses a nether portal to bring the visitor inside to meet with the prisoner. This still has the risk of invisible players entering the portal. But still, portals are unnecessary and anything unnecessary is removed from this prison. So how can the visitor even visit? Well, what if the visitor never enters the prison in the first place? When you hold down F3 and press the A key, it reloads all the chunks in your render distance. However, when you hold down the A key, it constantly is reloading every chunk, meaning you can't see any blocks. But what about entities? When you do this, you actually can see entities up to a certain range, and for players specifically, that range is a 48 block circular range from the player. So theoretically, if the visitor can get within 48 blocks of the prisoner while staying out of the area ban range, which is extra difficult considering that the outer bands also have a range of 48 blocks, the visitor could see the prisoner without ever entering the prison. With the way the bands are positioned, there is one area where you can be within 48 blocks of the prisoner but be further than 48 blocks away from the outer bands, and that is right here. So visitors can just stand here and be able to see the visitor. This eliminates any possible visiting escape since the visitor is never inside the prison. To start off, this prison is located above the nether roof, meaning you can't generate nether portals anywhere in the prison. This prison is also located in nether spawn chunks, meaning that using chunk skipping, light suppression, and chunk abuse exploits are impossible. Next, we have the outer bands. The least amount of outer bands possible is 3, so that is the amount used in this prison. Arranging them in a triangle formation like so creates an unbanned middle area where the main prison is located. Speaking of these outer bands, they are foxes, specifically Arctic foxes, and everyone knows that it is morally wrong to kill Arctic foxes, so nobody can destroy the outer bands. The reason they are foxes and not item bans is because item bans are vulnerable to tile tick delay, which gives you enough time inside an area ban to mine blocks. Foxes don't have this problem because the ban is always there and not constantly put through a ban machine, making tile tick delay useless. But if someone doesn't care about morals and wants to kill the fox anyway, they are met with a skulk sensor perception box surrounding the ban, including armor stands to detect if the fox is trying to be killed with TNT minecarts, and pressure plates for item elevation prevention. The skulk sensor sends a signal to this skulk sensor chain that leads to the interior of the prison. They're not covered by crying obsidian, instead there is crying obsidian in between them to prevent you from pushing full in between them to stop the signal from being sent to the interior. Speaking of the interior, there are three main things inside the interior: the roof detector, the floor detector, and the cell area. The roof detector is 5 layers of crying obsidian protected by skulk sensors that send a signal to the kill switch in under a second without using tile ticks, making it impossible to bypass with tile tick delay. The floor detector is 2 layers of tripwires that send a signal to skulk sensors protected by 3 layers of crying obsidian, also making it immune to tile tick delay. The skulk sensors also send a signal to the kill switch in under a second. Over 22 blocks away from the kill switch is the outer wall, to prevent TNT minecarts from reaching the fox. But I do have to mention something. This prison cannot patch every escape, and there are some that work on every prison of this type. Because I cannot patch these, I have chosen to ignore them. Those being withers, stasis chambers, tile tick suppression, and no region. If you have to resort to using one of those in your escape, I'll consider my goal a success, because it was not trying to patch any of them. Withers can be slightly mitigated by using wither walls, but all of the nether designs can be bypassed easily, barely even defend against them, and are all really expensive. So for that reason, I have chosen not to include any wither walls in this prison. Now it's time to talk about the cost of this prison. Because it's in spawn chunks, it needs to be able to be built in a short amount of time. This is because it's possible for someone to go inside the prison and log off during the prison's construction. Most spawn chunk prisons mitigate this by making their prison take under half a day to build, but that's assuming that nobody will go to world spawn for that entire amount of time. Raven's Revenge, the best spawn chunks prison right now, takes 8 hours to build with 4 people, assuming the guards are placing blocks at an optimal rate. That still takes longer than a regular school day to build, which is still way too expensive. That is why this prison is over 20 times cheaper than Raven's Revenge. This prison has a grand total of 16,129 blocks. If we calculate this based on having 3 guards, with each of them placing blocks at 3 blocks per second, the total amount of time needed to build this prison is roughly 29.8 minutes. Yep, you heard that right. This prison takes less than half an hour to build. This is currently the cheapest prison in Minecraft, and yet it is more secure than any other. However, there is still the argument about withers. Because wither walls take up so many blocks, it is impossible to make a cheap prison wither-proof. Because of this, I am not trying to prevent withers in this prison. If you have to use withers in your escape, like I mentioned before, I will call this prison a success, because it is able to defend against non-universal escapes while still being as cheap and as minimalistic as possible. Before you click off this video, I still have some very important stuff to say. I'd like to thank Blondburns and Elkato11 for decorating the exterior of this prison. They did an amazing job and you should check out both of their channels in the description. I'd also like to thank all of the escape testers for this prison. Their channels are all on screen and are also in the description. Make sure to check them all out. Remember, if you want to escape this prison, challenge yourself not to use any of the 4 universal escape methods I mentioned previously. But that's all from me, and I'll see you in the next video. Surely there's no way to patch those 4 escapes, right?